If you've watched the news or scrolled through your social media feed in the last 24 hours, you've seen one name everywhere: Jimmy Lai. The 78-year-old founder of the now-defunct Apple Daily has been sentenced to 20 years in prison by a Hong Kong court. Predictably, the Western media machine has gone into overdrive. They aren't just reporting a legal verdict, they're canonizing a saint. From London to Washington, the narrative is identical. The death of democracy, the end of press freedom, and a draconian crackdown. But as we already know, their reportage on the Jimmy Lai case is completely cloaked in anti-China propaganda, designed to keep ordinary Westerners in the dark. Today we'll go beyond that propaganda and look past the emotional headlines to ask, why is the West so obsessed with lying about this case? Why do they consistently ignore the legal realities of the national security law? And most importantly, why are they so concerned with China's internal affairs while their own backyards are in total disarray? This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Borham here in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. If you read CNN, they'll tell you that Jimmy Lai was sentenced for, quote-unquote, his role in pro-democracy protests and his media work. Germany's DW describes him simply as a democracy activist and media tycoon. But that's not at all accurate, is it? Let's take a look at the facts that these outlets conveniently bury past paragraph 10. Jimmy Lai was not jailed for writing an op-ed. He was convicted of conspiracy to collude with foreign forces. The Associated Press admits halfway through their report that the prosecution presented evidence of Lai's meetings with high-ranking US officials, including former Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. They quote the prosecution saying Lai used his media platform to request foreign countries to impose sanctions or engage in other hostile activities against China. Now ask yourself this: in what Western democracy is it legal to actively lobby a foreign superpower to collapse your own country's economy through sanctions? If a media mogul in New York, for example, was found to be coordinating with the Chinese government to sanction the US dollar, would the New York Times call him a freedom fighter? Of course not. He'd be facing the death sentence for treason. But when it happens in China, the BBC frames it as a violation of human rights. Now let's talk about the language. This is where Western media bias becomes truly loaded. The Guardian quotes UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who calls the sentence a politically motivated attempt to silence dissent. They use words like chilling, draconian, and shadowy to describe the legal process, and that's despite Hong Kong's legal system being largely modelled on the British common law system, meaning, among other things, that it includes principles like precedent, an independent judiciary, and key concepts such as habeas corpus and freedom of speech. In their report, the BBC writes, "The trial was seen by critics as a show trial, with the outcome predetermined by Beijing." Notice that handy journalistic shield they're using there. Seen by critics. Who are those critics? Well, as soon as you look closely, you'll find out they're the same Western-funded NGOs and politicians they're quoting elsewhere in the article. That's what we call a circular feedback loop of bias. They create the quote-unquote criticism, then report on that criticism as if it's an objective fact. And one term they love to use is the word draconian, which is employed constantly in Western media reports on China. The AP uses it to describe the national security law. But ask yourself this: why is a law designed to prevent foreign interference and violent riots draconian in Hong Kong, but the UK's own National Security Act 2023, which gives their police massive powers to detain people without charge, is just public safety? The Western media is hyper-fixated on a 20-year sentence for a man who actively sought to destabilise his country with foreign help. Yet, where is the 24/7 coverage of the political prisoners in their own backyard? Where was the BBC's daily democracy watch for Julian Assange when he was rotting in Belmarsh prison for years for the crime of actually practicing journalism and exposing Western war crimes? The Guardian reports that the UN is deeply concerned about Jimmy Lai, but where is the UN's deep concern regarding the 12,000 Brits arrested for social media posts last year alone? The Western media uses China as a convenient distraction. If they can convince their audiences that China is a dystopian nightmare because it enforces its own national security laws, then those audiences might not notice the crumbling infrastructure, the rising homelessness, the protection of powerful criminals, and the erosion of actual civil liberties in London, Paris, or Washington. As the Financial Times pearl clutches about Hong Kong's business environment, they ignore the fact that Western sanctions, the very things Jimmy Lai was calling for, are what actually hurt the people of Hong Kong. But one of the most dishonest parts of these reports is the Western propaganda outlets claiming that Jimmy Lai is a journalist. CNN quotes a media advocacy group saying, "The sentencing of Jimmy Lai is a final nail in the coffin for press freedom in Hong Kong." Let's be clear, Jimmy Lai was a billionaire power broker who used his tabloid, Apple Daily, as a political weapon. During the 2019 riots, his paper didn't just report the news. It provided maps for rioters and instructions on how to confront the police. Just imagine if a media outlet in London started publishing the home addresses of police officers and encouraging people to firebomb government buildings. Would the BBC defend that as press freedom? Of course not. They'd call it domestic terrorism. But because it happened in Hong Kong and because it served Western geopolitical interests to see China weakened, the media paints a halo over Jimmy Lai's head. So what is the takeaway from this blatant wave of Western propaganda? Well, it's simple. The Western media is not interested in the law, and they're not interested in the truth. They're interested in leverage. Jimmy Lai is a useful tool for them to maintain the China threat narrative. They use loaded language like draconian and crackdown to trigger an emotional response in you, hoping that you won't ask the difficult questions. Questions like, why is it okay for the US to have a Foreign Agents Registration Act, but China can't have a national security law? Or why is Jimmy Lai a hero for requesting sanctions while whistleblowers in the West are labelled traitors? The 20-year sentence for Jimmy Lai isn't about silencing democracy. It's about the sovereign right of a country to protect itself from foreign-funded subversion. And no amount of biased reporting from the BBC, CNN, or The Guardian can change that legal reality. And on that note, that will be all for today, you guys. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you noticed the shift in language across these articles? And why do you think the West is so desperate to protect Jimmy Lai? Let me know down below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.